St. Bartholomew's Hospital, London. Sarah Thompson, a 34-year-old midwife, was finishing her night shift when she heard the first cry coming from the delivery room. It was a sound she knew well, but that night something was different. The young mother, Emma, was only 17 years old, with no one by her side. When Sarah entered the room, she saw the girl staring at the ceiling with empty eyes, whilst the midwife placed the newborn on her chest. Emma whispered that she didn't want him, that she couldn't keep him. Sarah approached slowly, and when their eyes met with those of the little one, the world stopped. She asked for just 1 minute to hold him. But when she took that baby in her arms, she began to cry, as if she had given birth to him herself. What happened next would change 3 lives forever. Sarah Thompson had dedicated 12 years of her life to the maternity ward at St. Bartholomew's Hospital. At 34, she had witnessed thousands of births, comforted desperate mothers, and celebrated indescribable joys. That October night, however, the air seemed different, charged with an energy she couldn't decipher. It was her preferred night shift, when the hospital became quieter and she could dedicate more attention to each patient. Children had always been her passion, but life had denied her motherhood. 5 years of trying with James, 3 miscarriages, countless consultations that had ended with a definitive diagnosis. She would never be able to have children. Her marriage to James, once solid as a rock, had begun to crumble under the weight of that disappointment. He had taken the news worse than she had, and their relationship had become mechanical, focused only on basal temperatures and medical appointments. Sarah had found refuge in work, dedicating herself with growing passion to the newborns at the hospital, as if each one could fill the emptiness she carried within. Around 2 in the morning, the ambulance arrived. Emma Clark, 17 years old, was in advanced labor. No companion, no family, just her, frightened and alone, with a belly that betrayed her at the moment she needed strength most. Sarah received her with the gentleness that characterized her, immediately recognizing the look of someone who saw pregnancy as a curse rather than a gift. The birth was quick but intense. Emma squeezed Sarah's hand with desperate force, repeating through gritted teeth that she couldn't do it, that she wasn't ready. The baby was born at 3:47, a perfect boy with dark hair and tiny fists waving in the air. His first cry echoed in the room like a song of hope. The midwife gently placed him on Emma's chest, but the young mother kept her head turned towards the wall, eyes fixed on nothing. Emma gently pushed the baby away, whispering that she could keep him. Sarah, who was preparing the post-delivery checks, felt those words hit her like a punch to the stomach. She turned around and saw the newborn lying on the sheet, his small eyes opening to the world for the first time. Sarah slowly approached the bed. The baby was crying softly, a cry that asked for nothing more than to be loved. Looking at Dr. Williams, who nodded understandingly, Sarah asked if she could hold him for a moment. When she took the newborn in her arms, something broke inside her. He was warm, soft, perfect. He weighed barely more than 3 kilos, but seemed to contain all the weight of the world. The moment their eyes met, tears began to flow uncontrollably. They weren't tears of sadness, but of recognition. All her years of pain, losses, emptiness suddenly transformed into a love so pure and intense it was almost unbearable. She whispered to the baby that she saw him, that she wanted him. The newborn stopped crying, his eyes, still cloudy but incredibly expressive, fixed on Sarah's. In that moment, she felt maternal instinct in its purest form, wild and uncontrollable. It was as if she had recognized her child after a long separation. The hours that followed were the most intense of Sarah's life. Whilst Emma rested under sedation, she couldn't tear herself away from the newborn. She had settled him in the nursery, but every few minutes she found an excuse to check on him. The baby seemed to calm down only with her. With the other nurses, he cried. With Sarah, he immediately became peaceful, as if recognizing something familiar and safe. Dr. Williams observed Sarah with a mixture of understanding and concern, knowing her history of infertility. During the tea break, the doctor approached gently, reminding Sarah that the baby wasn't hers, that social services would take care of finding an adoptive family. Sarah nodded, knowing she was right, but every fiber of her being screamed otherwise. The thought of handing this baby over to strangers broke her heart. She had held him in her arms for less than an hour, but already felt she knew him, understood his needs, was the only person in the world who could truly care for him. Around 6 in the morning, Emma woke up. Sarah was back in her room, checking that everything was all right. The girl looked at her with still swollen eyes, asking about the baby with a broken voice. She confirmed her decision. She had no money, no family, and the baby deserved better. Sarah felt desperation growing in her chest. She knew Emma was making the most responsible decision, but the idea of that baby ending up in a children's home devastated her. Her heart was beating so hard she feared Emma might hear it. What she said next would change everything, breaking protocols and risking her career. But in that moment, none of that mattered to her. She confessed to Emma that she wanted him, that she had tried for years to have a baby without success, that she had felt he was already hers when she held him. Emma stared at her in silence for long seconds. In her teenage eyes mixed surprise, relief, and something that resembled hope. She had prayed all night for something like this to happen, for someone to come who would truly love him. Sarah felt a joy so intense it took her breath away. But then reality hit her like a cold shower. There were legal procedures, times to respect, and she had to speak to James, who didn't even know about that night, about that baby, about what she was feeling. In recent months they had spoken little. The pain of infertility had carved an abyss between them. But perhaps that baby could be salvation for both. She promised Emma she would speak to James that very day. Emma confirmed her decision with a firmness that surprised them both. If Sarah truly wanted him, if she would truly love him, she couldn't ask for anything better for her child. Sarah finished her shift in a state of emotional agitation never experienced before. She had called James explaining they needed to talk urgently, that something important had happened. In her voice was an excitement he hadn't heard for years. James was waiting at home, sitting at the kitchen table with a cold cup of tea. At 37, the last 5 years of failed attempts had aged him prematurely. His dark eyes, once full of hope, now showed only deep weariness. When Sarah entered, he was surprised by her expression. There was something different about her, an energy he hadn't seen for too long. She took him by the hand and guided him to the sofa, with trembling hands and a rapidly beating heart. Sarah told him everything. Emma, the birth, the baby rejected by his mother, the moment when she held him feeling he was hers. James listened in silence, his expression passing from surprise to concern. James's reaction was cautious. He understood what she felt, but couldn't make such important decisions based on a momentary emotion. Sarah exploded, replying that it wasn't a momentary emotion, but something deep and authentic. James began pacing the room, listing the difficulties, legal procedures, costs, time. What did they know about this girl? About the baby's father? Sarah explained Emma's situation, alone and without support, who wanted to give the baby up for adoption for his own good. James's question hit her like a slap. Did she really think they could offer what the baby deserved? He bitterly recalled how their love had been consumed in recent years, focused only on medical examinations and failed attempts. Sarah felt tears burn. James was right. They had lost the spontaneity and joy of being together. But that's precisely why they needed that baby, to remember why they wanted a family. James looked at her for a long time, seeing in her a hope he thought had died forever. He expressed his fears. What if it didn't work? If they weren't ready? If they couldn't be the parents the baby deserved? Sarah replied with determination. What if they could succeed? She had felt something magical that night, known she was destined to be that baby's mother. James sat beside her, taking her hands. He wanted the truth. Was she sure she wasn't projecting all the pain and desire of those years onto that newborn? Sarah thought about it seriously. Was it possible she was confusing desperation with maternal love? But thinking back to that moment in the delivery room, the baby's gaze, the feeling of completeness, she answered firmly, no. She had recognized him. He was her child. James saw in her eyes a determination never seen before. Sarah had always shown incredible strength during conception attempts, but this was different. It was the strength of a mother who had found her baby.
Enjoying the story? Give it a little like, and don't forget to subscribe. Now then, let's carry on.
Finally, he asked what they should do. Sarah proposed accompanying her to the hospital to meet Emma and the baby, then decide together. James nodded slowly, establishing that if they took this step, they would do it together, as it should have been from the beginning. That afternoon, Sarah and James arrived at the hospital with hearts full of conflicting emotions. Sarah had organized everything discreetly. Emma had agreed to meet James, and social services wouldn't arrive until the next day. As they walked through the corridors familiar to Sarah, James felt growing anxiety. He had never held a newborn, never imagined becoming a father this way. He had always thought he would live those moments in the delivery room beside Sarah. He expressed his fears to Sarah, who reassured him confidently. When he asked if she trusted him, James looked into her eyes and saw the woman he had fallen in love with 10 years earlier, the one he had married dreaming of a family together. Emma was waiting for them. She seemed even younger in daylight, with loose hair and eyes swollen from lack of sleep. The meeting was delicate. Emma asked practical questions about their situation, the house, work, future plans. When she learned they could never have other children, that this baby would be their only child with all their love, Emma began to cry silently. She had always dreamed that her child would have a real family, with parents who loved him, a home, a future. The crucial moment came when James asked to see the baby. Sarah felt her heart accelerate. If James didn't feel the same connection, everything would be over. In the nursery, the baby was awake, his dark eyes curiously exploring the environment. When he saw Sarah, he began moving his arms as if recognizing her. James slowly approached the cot, impressed by how small but perfect he was in every detail. When Sarah passed the newborn to James, for a moment he seemed awkward, but then the baby nestled naturally in his arms, as if he had always belonged there. James looked into the little one's eyes, and something magical happened. The baby stopped fidgeting and stared at him with an intensity impossible for a newborn of just a few hours. James felt a bond forming deep in his heart, whispering to the little one that he was Daddy. Sarah cried, seeing the transformation on her husband's face. It was the same expression she had felt: wonder, love, completeness. When James asked about the name, Sarah revealed that Emma wanted them to choose it. Without hesitation, James said, Oliver. It was the name they had chosen years before, the one they had put aside when they stopped hoping. Now, finally, they had an Oliver to love. The following days were a whirlwind of emotions, legal documents, and preparations. Emma had signed all the adoption papers, and social services, after evaluating the situation, had given their consent. Sarah and James were a stable couple with all the necessary requirements. Sarah had taken leave to dedicate herself completely to Oliver. Every night she got up for feeds. Every day she learned something new about motherhood. James had transformed into the most caring father imaginable, spending hours holding Oliver, singing made-up lullabies, changing nappies with surgical precision. Their house had filled with life. The nursery, empty for years, now housed Oliver, with sky-blue walls and an animal mobile. The silence that had characterized the house had been replaced by the sounds of a baby: cries, coos, laughter. But the real transformation had occurred in their marriage. Finding a common purpose again, a love to share, had brought them together in an unexpected way. They looked into each other's eyes again, touched each other tenderly, shared knowing smiles whilst watching Oliver sleep. One evening, whilst Sarah was bottle-feeding Oliver, James sat beside her on the sofa. He asked if she was happy, and Sarah, looking at Oliver, who was sucking eagerly whilst staring at her with his little eyes, confessed she had never known what it really meant to be happy until that moment. James admitted feeling reborn, as if the last 5 years had been just waiting for this moment. Sarah expressed her concerns about Emma, and James revealed he had called her. She was finishing her A-levels, had resumed studying, knew she had made the right decision. Sarah wondered if Emma would ever want to see Oliver again. James thought that, if it happened, she would always be welcome. Oliver should know his story, know he had been loved from the first moment by both his mothers. Oliver fell asleep in Sarah's arms whilst the sun set, painting the sky orange and pink. James observed they were lucky, but Sarah corrected, they were blessed. The difference was that luck was random, whilst blessings came when the heart was open enough to recognize a miracle. They watched Oliver sleep, unaware of the love surrounding him. Sarah understood that all the past suffering had been necessary to lead them to that perfect moment. She whispered to Oliver how much he had been awaited and desired by 3 hearts, hers, James's, and Emma's. The baby smiled in his sleep, as if he had heard the words. In that smile, Sarah saw everything she had always searched for: unconditional love, the dreamed of family, the motherhood denied by nature, but granted by destiny. 6 months after that incredible October night, the Thompson family was living the purest happiness ever experienced. Oliver had grown into a smiling and curious baby, with dark eyes bright with intelligence and a contagious laugh that filled the house with joy. Sarah had returned to work part-time, dedicating every free moment to Oliver. James had discovered a natural paternal instinct, spending evenings playing, reading stories, teaching made-up songs. Their love for Oliver had not only healed the wounds of the past, but had strengthened their bond as a couple. One Sunday morning, whilst they were having breakfast in the garden with Oliver in his high chair, laughing at seeing a butterfly, the doorbell rang. Sarah went to answer and was surprised to see Emma. The girl had changed a lot: short hair, jeans, and a simple t-shirt, but she seemed more mature and confident. In her eyes there was still sadness, but also a new serenity. She had finished her A-levels and would start university in September to study psychology. Sarah invited her in warmly, assuring her she never bothered. Emma had the right to know how Oliver was, it being her merit too. They went to the garden where James was playing aeroplanes with Oliver, holding him high, whilst the baby laughed heartily. When Emma saw Oliver, her eyes filled with tears. The baby was beautiful, chubby, and healthy, with a radiant smile. It was evident he was loved, cared for, happy. She observed how much he had grown and how beautiful he was. Oliver looked at her curiously, then stretched out a little hand towards her. Emma hesitated, then gently touched the small hand with her finger. Oliver grabbed her finger, squeezing it tight, making a contented gurgle. Sarah noticed he had Emma's nose and her newborn eyes, but the smile belonged to her and James. Emma smiled through tears, recognizing that you could see how loved he was. They stayed in the garden all afternoon. Emma told them about her studies and future plans. She wanted to specialize in child psychology to help children in difficulty. Sarah and James shared Oliver's first words, first steps, all those small daily miracles that had filled their lives. Before leaving, Emma confessed she didn't regret the decision she had made. Seeing Oliver so happy, she knew she had done the right thing, but thanked them for letting her see him. Sarah corrected her. It was Emma who had given them the greatest gift. When Emma asked if she could return occasionally, James replied that this was her home. Oliver should grow up knowing he had 2 mothers who loved him, the one who brought him into the world and the one who cared for him. Emma hugged Sarah and James, then bent down to give a final kiss on Oliver's forehead, whispering to him to be happy, because both his mothers loved him. As Emma walked away, Sarah and James remained in the garden with Oliver asleep in Sarah's arms. The sun was setting, painting the sky orange and pink. James observed they were fortunate, but Sarah specified they were blessed. She explained the difference. Fortune was random. Blessings came when the heart was ready to receive them, open enough to recognize a miracle. They watched Oliver sleep, unaware of the love surrounding him. Sarah understood that all the past suffering, all the failed attempts, all the tears, had been necessary to lead them to that perfect moment. She whispered to Oliver how much he had been awaited and desired by three hearts, hers, James's, and Emma's. The baby smiled in his sleep, as if he had heard the words. That night, putting Oliver in his cot, Sarah and James realized their story wasn't finished, but had just begun. They had a child to raise, a family to build, a love to share every day. Everything had started with a simple request to hold a baby for a moment that had become forever. If this story has moved you to tears, leave a like, share in the comments. Do you believe love at first sight exists between mothers and children too? Have you ever experienced a moment that changed everything in an instant? Subscribe and turn on notifications for more stories that prove miracles happen when you least expect them. Remember, sometimes love arrives in the most unexpected way, but always at the right time.